I'm pleased to tell you that we have made good on the first two promises, staffing safety forces in the jail. We have been aggressively working to achieve the third. Let me tell you the story of what we have done. Over the past 3 years, city employees have taken concessions in his or her overall compensation package. The city in total realized a 5.17% overall savings in compensation. The entire city jail is now open and has been near capacity 96.7% of the time. Additionally, we have reduced basic operational costs by 6.2%. We have implemented lean practices in our service delivery to provide higher quality municipal service at a reduced cost to our taxpayers. After 3 years of working this plan, we have achieved financial sustainability in the core city operations. I tell you the story of this community supports safety of its residents and businesses. That in 2015, the fire department is back to full staffing, and that the city received over $300,000 in grants monies to put to good use by purchasing safety equipment, which aids in the safety of our firefighters on the scene and advanced life support service that we provide to the public. I talk about a Zanesville Police Department that under new leadership increased the staff to 53 officers, which in turn realized a decrease in crime thanks to more proactive enforcement. Sting operations resulted in over 40 arrests, and the neighborhood intervention unit has been implemented. Through the leadership of our Public Safety Director, Fred Buck, Police Chief Kim Nuttall, and the commitment of community, religious leaders, and the courage of our uniformed men and women, we continue to build upon the progress we've made. The city code enforcement inspections totaled over 4,500, with nearly 18,000 corrected violations. When telling the story of city's Zanesville economic recovery and growth, I always start by illustrating examples of strong partnerships that exist with Muskegon County and our state and federal representatives. The examples I cite may not be immediately noticeable to our residents on the street, but the investments into infrastructure set the stage for continued growth in the area. With these investments, enable me to share the story of economic recovery by pointing to building department dramatically increasing commercial inspections by completing over 1,100 inspections, as well as issuing nearly 600 permits, thus increasing revenue over 2013. The Zanesville Municipal Airport provides another portal for our area's economic growth, exhibited by increased fuel volumes sold in 2014. In 2014, the city continued neighborhood stabilization by demolishing over 30 structures and registering nearly 90 vacant properties, and by investing over $572,000 in housing repair to residents in need. I tell the story of how in 2014 we aligned the public service and community development departments and were fortunate to acquire the leadership and expertise of Jay Bennett, so that once again we plan neighborhood issues holistically and create future target areas of investment for our regional and community partners. All residents and businesses benefit every day from the many basic services we offer through the Public Service Department, including solid waste collection, safe drinking water, keeping streets open, and collecting and crediting of thousands of dollars in service payments, just to mention a few. The Cemetery and Parks Division continued teamwork necessary to keep our cemeteries looking for over 90 burials last year, and by providing weekly maintenance to over 200 acres of parks and public spaces. In partnership with City Council, we charted the course for Secret's Auditorium investment. We're investing over $1.4 million that will install a new HVAC system, make critical roof improvements, and some other structural facility repairs. This investment will again assure the community's auditorium is fully functional for the next several years. My story tells of a city team that delivers day-to-day services while looking for opportunities to stretch the dollars provided by you, the ratepayers of the city services. Good examples are the significant savings achieved through city staff performing the majority of the daily inspection of the various construction projects. Our treatment plant staff continues professional operations that ensure that your daily drinking water meets Department of Health standards and that the discharge of wastewater meets EPA permit regulations. And little seen by the public is our traffic signal division, maintaining all the electrical systems throughout the city departments, aiding all the community events, all while providing constant maintenance to over 76 traffic intersections. And so 1 year ago, we began to see effects of the streamlining of operations. We began planning for addressing some of the stubborn and capital and neighborhood problems. A transforming, sustainable city must be able to maintain the critical infrastructure that supports civic life. Let me tell you where we stand today. The first stubborn problem is parks in our public spaces. Great cities need great parks, and ours have been underfunded for the last several decades and are now underutilized. Our city staff has begun working on changing that, focusing that the energy of our engaged citizens in planning and investing in public spaces are being requested by our residents. A good example of this is the current partnership with City Council persons Gentry and Norman. These councilwomen organize community members and are working with staff in transforming underutilized city space into an off-leash dog park. We will continue to seek new partnerships. I believe parks and recreation offerings matter to Zanesvillians, giving families quality options to be together, helping small business owners whose livelihoods are supported by our audiences. Stubborn problem number 2 in our community, drug issues. When I first took office 3 years ago, crime was up. People in the neighborhoods felt like they were abandoned. Our inner city families had lost hope. There was no vision, no expectation of making the core of Zanesville a better place for all our citizens. We need to be a city that embraces our elderly, a place that our children, that revitalizes our neighborhoods, and a place that holds people accountable for the crimes they commit. I'm proud to say that we are on the right path. When we chose Kim Miller to be Zanesville Police Chief, we made each other a promise. Kim promised to work every day, giving our officers the support they needed to build a stronger relationship with the community. In turn, I would provide him with the resources they needed to effectively and safely do their jobs. We agreed to hold each other accountable and work together to make our neighborhoods safer, and we are. But good numbers should not sugarcoat the fact that there are still too much crime happening in our city. And I stand firm when I say to you that I will work tirelessly to make these numbers better. Stubborn problem number 3 is revitalizing our neighborhoods. Our city core is struggling. We have concentrated pockets of poverty, areas of substandard housing, and families that are working several jobs and still not making ends meet and not able to break the cycle. We must source investments with partners that provide parents opportunities to job training, source investment that provides safe, affordable housing options, source investments that make neighborhoods and streets safe. Far too many of the Zanesville families are living on the edge every day, every month and year, especially single parents. These neighbors face so many barriers when they try to get ahead. City Council has final reading tonight on hiring a redevelopment administrator. Her new position will work with the director in developing opportunities voiced from our residents, coupled with the alignment of partners and investment. I ask for city council partnership on this issue. I urge our economic, faith-based, secular community partners to work with us this year in designing a broad reach program of involving an investment which lays a foundation for a new growth of the city, this time within our core neighborhoods. As a community, we can work together and install solutions that move our families and children into neighborhoods of safety and a future of promise. Stubborn problem number 4 is trying to build capital investment and older infrastructure while maintaining affordable utility rates. Both must be addressed. This goes hand in hand with stubborn problem number 3. The city is in a constant state of juggling infrastructure investment against the appropriate burden of user rates. On one hand, we face EPA demands, and on the other, declining sources of federal and state revenues. There is no more evidence of the need for critical infrastructure improvements than our streets. Our city streets are in variable states of fair to poor condition. Poor streets affect commerce, automotive operating costs, public transportation costs, and the quality of life in our neighborhoods and downtown business districts. The Zanesville City Council wants to fix that. The Zanesville-Muscatine County Chamber of Commerce wants to fix that. People who drive on our streets want us to fix that, and I want to fix that. If we want to fix that, it will take all of us in this room to make it happen. We have to take matters into our own hands. I have proposed in the city's permanent budget, which the City Council has in front of them tonight, a small amount of funding that will develop a current modeling of existing pavement conditions and the cost of investment necessary to restore our city streets and alley system to a better condition. I pledge that upon the conclusion of that work later this year, I will convene a committee of citizens and business interests for the purpose of reviewing the findings and to work with city staff in developing a long-term solutions based on the plan that will solve stubborn problem number 4. In closing, the state of the city is that we are fiscally stable. The story of the city of Zanesville is incrementally becoming safer. Our story is that services are being delivered in effective, cost-effective ways. Our story is that community volunteers are planning for what Zanesville can become so that further investments can be targeted, which leads to more jobs and better neighborhoods. Those of you who have known me that I like to tell a good story. However, it takes all of us to promote our city for investment. It takes everyone to help police keep our neighborhoods safer, to help our kids succeed, to re-energize our public spaces. What choice will you make when you leave here today? Will you help me tell this story of the city? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call Zanesville City Council meeting to order for March 9, 2015. Please stand and join me in the Lord's Prayer, follow the pledge of allegiance to the flag. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come,
thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Hutchison,
Here.
Mr. Roberts,
Present.
Ms. Gildow,
Here.
Mr. Foreman,
Here.
Mrs. Gentry, Mr. Tarbert,
Here.
Mr. Baker, Mrs. Norman, Mr. Scher,
Here.
Mr. Vincent.
Here. Need a motion to excuse Mr. Baker?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Roberts, seconded by Mr. Tarbert. Discussion on excusing Mr. Baker. Okay, hearing none, all in favor of excusing Mr. Baker signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Baker stands excused. We're now approval of the minutes from February 23rd, 2015.
Mr. President,
Mr. Scher.
I would like to make a slight correction. Page 11 of 12, 6 lines up from the bottom, second to the last word in that, instead of interrupt, I would like that to read interpret.
Okay, so a motion from Mr. Scher
Second.
to change the word from interrupt to interpret, seconded by Mr. Tarbert. Is everyone clear on where that is? Okay, discussion? Okay, all in favor of making the modification as far as changing the minutes to read interpret instead of interrupt, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now the minutes from February 23rd, 2015 as corrected. With that, I entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Mr. President,
Mr. Hutchison?
I move to accept the minutes as printed with the amended version.
Motion by Mr. Hutchison, second by Mr. Tarbert. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of accepting these corrected minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes stand approved as corrected. We're now communications, reports, and resolutions. Resolution 1529.
A resolution of support for the Ohio Development Services Agency, ODSA, Appalachian Assistance Line Item.
We're first reading.
Move for first reading.
First reading by Mr. Roberts,
Second.
second by Ms. Gildow. Discussion?
Mr. President,
Okay, yes. Mr. Tarbert?
Ben, is there any urgency to this?
I would say if we could move it forward, we could send it over to Omega and then on up to the State House.
And with that, before that, Mr. Tarbert, we do need a correction here as far as what this is. This is a resolution, and down at the bottom of the first page under Section 2, it does refer to this ordinance and should say this resolution.
Mr. President, I'd make a motion to amend 1529 in Section 2 to say this resolution instead of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Tarbert to
Second.
change Section 2, this ordinance, to this resolution, second by Mr. Scher. Discussion on corrections?
Another correction. Now therefore be it resolved, I would think.
I'll amend my motion to include that. Now therefore be it resolved instead of ordained,
Okay, and where's that?
right above Section 1.
Okay, so Ms. Tarbert wants to amend Section 2 from this ordinance to this resolution, and then up above, now therefore be resolved.
Correct.
Okay, so motion and a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Scher. Discussion. Okay, all in favor of those two amendments, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are now at Resolution 1529 as amended.
I would move to waive the readings, pass as normal legislation.
Second.
Motion to waive by Mr. Tarbert, second by Mr. Scher to waive and pass as normal legislation. Discussion. I have a roll call vote for waiving the readings.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now I need a motion for passage.
So moved.
Moved Moved by Mr. Roberts,
Second.
second by Ms. Gildow. Further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries, resolution is passed. We're now at proposed ordinance 1530.
Mr. President,
Mr. Scher.
I move that we add ordinance 1534 as presented to council as item 5A under proposed ordinances.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Scher to add in ordinance number 1534 as item 5A, and second by Mr. Tarbert. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of adding ordinance 1534 as item 5A, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at ordinance 1530.
Approving a labor agreement with Local 1573, Council Number 8, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and declaring an emergency.
Move to waive.
Moved away by Mr. Roberts,
Second.
second by Mr. Hutchison. Discussion on waiving. Okay, hearing none, we'll have roll call vote for waiving the readings.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now any motion for passage.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Norman,
Second.
second by Mr. Scher. Discussion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Roberts.
I just wanted to thank the administration for negotiating this, just like they did the other contracts. I think we got a very balanced turnout on all the contracts that were negotiated this year.
Very nice. Okay, thank you, Mr. Roberts. Anything else from council? Okay, we'll have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Ordinance is passed. We're now at ordinance 1531.
An ordinance adopting an updated citizens' participation plan required for CDBG and home funding.
For first reading.
Move for first reading.
Moved by Mr. Tarbert for first reading.
Second.
Second by Ms. Gentry. Discussion. Okay, hearing none, all in favor of first reading, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at ordinance 1532.
Authorizing the proper city official to provide funds to the Transportation Improvement District Board for operational expenses.
We're at first reading.
Move first reading.
Motion by Mr. Roberts for first reading.
Second.
Second by Ms. Gildow. Discussion. Okay, hearing none, all in favor of first reading, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. President,
Motion carries. Mr. Tarbert?
could I abstain?
So noted, Mr. Tarbert abstains. We're now at ordinance 1533.
An ordinance authorizing the proper city official to purchase a new mow trim from Muskingum Tractor and Equipment for the street division and declaring an emergency.
A motion to waive.
Move to waive.
Moved waived by Mr. Hutchison,
Second.
second by Mr. Roberts. Discussion on waiving. Okay, hearing none, we will have roll call vote for waiving the readings.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye. Motion carries. Now any motion for passage.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Tarbert,
Second.
second by Ms. Gentry. Discussion. Okay, hearing none, we'll have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Ordinance is passed.
President,
Ms.
I'd
Gentry.
like to say that I'm happy that we were able to purchase that from a local dealership in town.
Thank you, Ms. Gentry. Now move on to item 5A, ordinance 1534.
An ordinance to vacate a portion of right-of-way at the intersection of Fifth and South Streets and an undocumented alley to the rear of 400 South Street in the city of Zanesville, Ohio, as herein provided and declaring an emergency.
Move to waive.
Second.
Waived by Mr. Scher, seconded by Mr. Tarver. Discussion of waiving. Hearing none, we'll have roll call vote of waiving the readings.
Mr. Hutchison.
Aye.
Mr. Roberts.
Aye.
Ms. Gildow.
Aye.
Mr. Foreman.
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry.
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert.
Aye.
Mrs. Norman.
Aye.
And Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now I need a motion for passage.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Roberts.
Second.
By Ms. Gildow. Discussion. Okay, and with that, I do have a petition from Mr. Cole Graham here, and he submitted that in case council did have questions. He has spoken to council about this before and also presented during previous legislation brought before council regarding this project. So with that, if council has any questions, I'll invite him up. Otherwise, anything else from council? We have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison.
Aye.
Mr. Roberts.
Aye.
Ms. Gildow.
Aye.
Mr. Foreman.
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry.
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert.
Aye.
Mrs. Norman.
Aye.
And Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Ordinance is passed. Now move on to ordinances for action. Ordinance 1519.
An ordinance rescinding ordinance 00-46.
For second reading.
Move for second reading.
Move for second reading by Mr. Tarbert.
Second.
Second by Mr. Roberts. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor of second reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to ordinance 1520.
An ordinance amending ordinance 1345, which provided for dual occupancy of an employment position.
For second reading.
Move for second reading.
Moved by Mr. Hutchison for second reading.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Tarbert. Discussion.
Mr. President.
Mr. Tarbert.
Mr. Bennett, did you have any, I mean, Mr. Case brought up that point at the last meeting. Why are we doing 3 months of training? I mean, what's
It's not,
the-
this specifically, on this offering is slated more towards the reason we could offer, more so than the months or the time frame. The current authorization is for dual training. There are occasions when we may have a need to have an employee off while still on our books. If there's an investment into an employee that has faced an emergency situation, and we decided to retain that employee and help them during that time, we could not have another person in that position while they are off. So we're specifically trying to get out where council has authorized for training. There's also an instance where we might need to have an employee off for an emergency, and we would need to have somebody in that position while having 2 people on our payroll for that specific period of time. So it was specifically that. I looked at it, and council had previously authorized a 60-day period. I thought if somebody's going to be out, then perhaps we could look at that for like up to.
And you may not know the answer to this. Is this something that happens frequently, or are we talking
No,
like
very
Is this happening right
infrequently.
now in the city, or does it happen 3
It
times a
is
month?
happening
or-
right now, and I don't have the ability to reach out to that person. I guess, and perhaps Rhonda could talk a little bit about having a PERS ramification of what used to be allowed was to have somebody off and be able to have a contractual employee where we did not have. That has been hindered recently, I guess.
It's Public Employees Retirement System. It frowns upon contractual labor. And if we would have somebody as a contractual labor, we would still end up paying the city share of PERS. So, and you have to go through a lengthy process to get even that contractual person approved through PERS. This ordinance would allow us to have a person in the dual position. Not necessarily both people there day-to-day working, but like Mr. Bennett said, if somebody's off.
Would you be able to let council know when this dual position is in effect, or
Yes.
with how many employees or something, just so we can kind of keep a tab
Yes,
on it, so that we know if it's,
Absolutely.
okay, thank you.
Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. Foreman.
How would, help me understand, it's a case-by-case basis? Is that-
Absolutely.
And so who would determine what period of time that would take place?
I think depending upon the employee's position and their long-term need to be not here with the city, we would look at that.
Okay.
Okay, anything else from council? Okay, with that, we're at second reading. So all in favor of second reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at ordinance 1523.
Providing appropriations for use during the fiscal year 2015 and declaring an emergency.
It says we're at second reading, but Mr. Tarver, did you want to make comment on this?
We had a Ways and Means Committee meeting tonight. It was recommended to council that this ordinance be passed. I don't know that the recommendation was not so much that the readings be waived, but that council was in favor of passage of this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Tarver. With that, entertain a motion.
Move for second reading.
Second reading by Mr. Tarver, second by Mr. Roberts. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of second reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at ordinance 1524.
An ordinance authorizing the proper city official to apply for OWDA low-interest loan funding, advertise for bids for construction of the Linden Draining Project, and enter into contracts with the lowest and best bidder.
For second reading.
Move for second reading.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roberts for second reading, second by Mr. Tarver. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of second reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're now at ordinance 1525.
An ordinance authorizing the proper city official to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2015 citywide overlays with the lowest and best bidder.
For second reading.
Move for second reading.
Moved by Mr. Tarver for second reading,
Second.
second by Ms. Gildow. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of second reading? Oh, Mr. Bennett?
If I might, since this ordinance is specifically tied to the budget, when you all pass the budget, then we would have the authority then to go out and actually get busy on accepting and advertising and accepting bids. For your consideration, if you're comfortable with this going forward, I would ask if we could look at waiving these readings, because that would start the 30-day clock. The budget is written as an emergency and will be effective upon passage. There's a little bit of difference with this one, for your consideration.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Move to waive.
Second.
Moved away the readings by Mr. Tarver, second by Mr. Roberts. Discussion on waiving. We have roll call vote of waiving the readings.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now I need a motion for passage.
So move.
Second.
Wow. Mr. Roberts?
Okay.
Okay, and Mrs. Norman. Further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman,
Aye.
and Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries, ordinance is passed. We're now at ordinance 1517.
Amending ordinance number 00-16, which adopted a classification plan for city employees amending ordinance number 1315 amended, which authorized a maximum schedule of positions, and amending ordinance number 1316 amended, which established pay, benefits, and employment policies for unaffiliated employees.
We're at third reading.
Move for third reading and passage.
Third reading passed by Mr. Hutchison, second by Mr. Foreman. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll have roll call vote for passage.
Mr. Hutchison,
Aye.
Mr. Roberts,
Aye.
Ms. Gildow,
Aye.
Mr. Foreman,
Aye.
Mrs. Gentry,
Aye.
Mr. Tarbert,
Aye.
Mrs. Norman, Mr. Scher.
Aye.
Motion carries, ordinance is passed. Now, draft orders, which we have none, so we'll move on to private petitions and communications. Got a petition from Mr. Eric Jones, 221 Locke Avenue regarding Republican democracy.
Hello, everyone. Okay, we'll start where I always start. Zanesville has been deprived of Republican democracy. What we have here is a tyranny of the majority. Now, this has been going on for approximately 30 years. There was an ordinance passed, I think, back in 1984, changing from Robert's Rules of Order to Ohio Revised Code. All right. And there you can add this as a stubborn problem for the city. Now, the question I've asked, and I asked this last time, and I'll ask it again, I'm going to just keep going over it until either something happens or if it doesn't happen, whichever way we're going to do it. So how is the Elster maintained? Okay, so I'm going to do a quick accounting because Mr. Vincent didn't say, Mr. Vincent was telling me I'm not allowed to pull the accounting, so I'm not going to
With
pull
that,
the accounting.
Mr. Jones, if you refer to the president.
Is that again?
Refer to the president, please.
Refer to, I can do that
Just refer
again.
to me as the president.
I can't understand you.
When referring to me, just refer to me as president of council, sir.
President of council?
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a reason for that real quick?
Yes, it's part of keeping it from being personalized, personal attacks. So,
Calling you Mr. Vincent is a personal attack?
it's part of that, sir. Explained it before.
If Ms. Culberson, when she asked for roll call, she's giving a personal attack by calling you by your names. I mean, if you're
Mr.
gonna-
Jones,
if that's gonna,
you have a history of attacking with offensive words.
I have never attacked anybody here, Mr. Vincent. Everything,
Please,
everything.
Mr. Jones, please go with your presentation, okay?
How exactly, what are the rules for the private petition? I've asked this a number of times, Mr. Vincent. You haven't given it to me yet. Now, you have the paper back there, it says I get 3 minutes.
Yes, sir,
okay?
you do.
And I get, you gave on the paper a number of, well, I think it's 139 point, whichever was about written records. Are those the two rules for the private petition? I'll stop. I'm not in a hurry. This has been in effect for 30 years. So if you're going to say what the rules are, you have an opportunity. One of your jobs as the presiding officer is to broadcast what the rules are for city council. It's one of your jobs. You got a parliamentarian there. He will vouch that. You're supposed to let the community know what the rules are. I'm asking you, what are the rules?
You have 23 minutes, 23 seconds.
23 seconds.
Yes.
Okay. So I've got a quick accounting. There's 5 of you up there who have not read the 2 books. That's my interpretation. 3 of you have read them, but have disregarded the lessons. 1, I'm not for sure, unless you, Mr. Roberts, I'm not for sure if you've read it or not. I'll ask you after the meeting. I'm thinking you tried to.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Your time is up. Okay, with that, we'll move on to miscellaneous unfinished business. Mr. Jones,
may I ask
you're
for an
done. Thank-
extension?
Mr.
May I ask
Jones,
for an extension?
Mr. Jones, you're out of order. Please sit down.
I can't ask for an extension of you.
Mr. Jones, we go through these each time.
I
So,
think we go through each time, but can I ask each time?
no, sir. Please sit down. If council wants to speak up and grant just in time, they have that opportunity to do that. So with that, there's someone from the audience who'd like to be recognized to speak before council. It's not filed a petition. If the council would like to grant the gentleman a chance to speak, please make a motion. Okay, with that, anyone make a motion? Anyone make a motion? Okay, thank you. So with that, sir, no one's made a motion for you to speak, so I can't allow it. So Moving on to miscellaneous unfinished business, which we have none. I'll move to, or go to administration. Anything else from council?
President,
Mr. Tarbert.
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Miskota, what, is the city doing anything to help the senior center with the issue that happened out there?
Absolutely. Right now, we have their Meals on Wheels kind of operating out of the auditorium to help them out until such time as they talk to Ann Combs, the director this morning. They're still looking to find a kitchen as their biggest problem right now. Until they find a kitchen, then they can figure out what they're going to do, but we've been in touch with them every day.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anything else from council?
May I add to that,
Ms.
please?
Gildo.
We are meeting, the people on the levy campaign committee meet weekly and have done so for a certain length of time. Unfortunately, all the planning that's gone into the work so far has been sort of preempted by the ceiling tiles falling and the fact that the building that is rented is considered unsafe. Ann Combs and her staff have done a fabulous job, and there has been a great deal of cooperation and collaboration by the city and the county. So I feel I speak for the committee in saying that, we're all very appreciative of the spirit of cooperation. You can't plan for things like this, and for those who may be critical, it's not as if the senior center has been unaware of problems with the building. These are things that they can't control or pay for. So, whatever community support is out there is also appreciated. But right now, if it weren't for cooperation from the city and the county, the problem would be so much worse.
All right, thank you. Anything else from council? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I make a
Move to
motion
adjourn by Mr. Tarbert, second by Mr. Hutchison. All in favor of adjournment, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.